These capabilities turned potential vulnerabilities into manageable risks. What appeared on paper as a lightly armored tank became, in practice, a mobile command post capable of influencing the battlefield far beyond its gun barrel. Psychologically, the impact on both sides was profound. American crews, confident in their ability to maintain communication and receive timely support, advanced with initiative and audacity. German soldiers, witnessing units bypass defensive positions and arrive where they were least expected, experienced frustration and disbelief. The speed, precision, and coordination of the Shermans shattered assumptions about the limits of American forces. For many German officers, the invisible power of these radios, combined with unbroken supply lines, represented a strategic challenge for which they had no immediate solution. By the close of this section, the operational picture was clear. The M4 Sherman's radios, integrated with efficient logistics and trained crews, enabled the Allies to sustain a level of battlefield coordination and momentum that outstripped German expectations. Rapid communication turned ordinary advances into coordinated offensives, mitigated risk, and amplified the impact of each armored unit. The German assumption that supply constraints and slower communication would stall the Allies proved catastrophically wrong. The next phase angles will examine the human, tactical, technological, leadership, and enemy perspectives that together illuminate why the Sherman's radios and the logistical backbone supporting them were decisive in reshaping the European campaign. The M4 Sherman was more than a tank. It was a vessel of human ingenuity and coordination. Crews, typically 5 men, relied on a precise division of labor: driver, gunner, loader, commander, and radio operator. The radio operator became a linchpin of operations, relaying real-time information between the platoon, company, and higher command. On dusty roads and in open fields, under fire, these men communicated the position of enemy forces, obstacles, and opportunities with urgency and clarity. Crew members endured blistering heat, fatigue, and the psychological strain of constant threat. Inside the Sherman's cramped interior, radios crackled with updates, orders, and urgent calls for support. The ability to remain calm, articulate, and decisive under these conditions determined the effectiveness of entire units. Soldiers developed an almost instinctual rhythm, scanning terrain, coordinating movement, and transmitting information in a seamless dance that merged human endurance with technology. Each mile advanced was a testament not only to machinery, but to the discipline and skill of the crews within. Tactical angle. Tactically, the Sherman's radios reshaped the battlefield. Units could maneuver fluidly, responding to enemy movements with unprecedented speed. Flanking maneuvers that once required meticulous pre-planning could now be improvised in real time. Infantry and artillery could be synchronized with armor advances, transforming what might have been disjointed attacks into cohesive strikes. German commanders, accustomed to slower communication and reliance on runners or field telephones, found themselves reacting to events already resolved. A reinforced Sherman platoon could call for immediate artillery support, outflank entrenched positions, or coordinate with neighboring tanks to encircle enemy units. The battlefield became dynamic rather than static, and speed of communication directly translated into tactical superiority. What previously relied on anticipation and luck now depended on real-time information, giving Allied forces an operational edge that German defenders could scarcely counter. Technological angle. The technological innovation of the Sherman's radio system was subtle yet decisive. Unlike earlier armored vehicles, the M4 was equipped with robust, reliable radios in each tank, often the SCR 508 or SCR 506 models, which allowed voice communication across platoons and even between companies. These radios enabled the flow of intelligence, coordination of artillery, and reporting of mechanical issues, essentially turning each tank into a mobile command post. Technology was not limited to hardware. Standardized procedures ensured that radio operators transmitted messages in concise, structured formats to avoid confusion under stress. Codes, call signs, and priority protocols maintained order amidst chaos. Mechanics and signal officers worked behind the lines to maintain equipment, troubleshoot interference, and ensure uninterrupted connectivity. The result was an armored network capable of reacting instantly, coordinating maneuvers, and sustaining operational tempo that German forces could not match. Leadership angle. Leadership on both macro and micro levels leveraged this technological edge. Patton's aggressive command style demanded speed, adaptability, and decisiveness, qualities that relied on reliable communication. Commanders could issue orders rapidly and adjust to changing conditions in real time. Within individual units, Sherman commanders relied on radios to coordinate tank formations, request support, and respond to unforeseen threats. Decisions that once required messengers or delayed planning could now be executed in minutes, preserving initiative and exploiting weaknesses in enemy lines. Leadership became inseparable from communication. Officers who mastered the coordination of men, machines, and radios amplified the combat effectiveness of their units exponentially. These four angles, the endurance of human crews, tactical agility, technological innovation, and leadership integration, paint the first layer of why the Sherman's radios were transformative. The interplay of people, machinery, and strategy elevated ordinary armored units into coordinated, high-tempo forces capable of reshaping the battlefield. The next part of Angles will explore the German perspective, moral considerations, strategic implications, and operational innovation, providing a complete picture of why this seemingly small advantage had monumental effects on the European campaign. From the German viewpoint, Allied coordination via Sherman radios was confounding. German units, relying on slower field communications, runners, telephones, or flag signals, found themselves constantly outpaced. Counterattacks that might have succeeded against poorly coordinated opponents faltered because American tanks maneuvered in real time, adjusting fire, flanking positions, and reporting reinforcements instantly. Field reports repeatedly noted the frustration among German commanders. Orders arrived too late, reconnaissance data was outdated, and frontline units could be bypassed before defensive positions were fully manned. Even elite panzer divisions, accustomed to rapid strikes and calculated offensives, struggled to cope. The Sherman's radios effectively transformed Allied units into an integrated network, one where every platoon could see the same operational picture simultaneously. This synchronization created an invisible barrier that German commanders could not penetrate, forcing retreats, missed opportunities, and mounting psychological strain across units. Moral and human considerations angle. The human and moral dimension of using radios in combat was subtle but impactful. Radio operators faced intense pressure. A single miscommunication could lead to friendly fire incidents or mission failure. Yet their work was largely uncelebrated, performed in confined, noisy, and dangerous spaces inside tanks. Operators needed mental resilience, quick thinking, and clarity under fire. At the same time, the psychological impact on crews was profound. Confidence in communication systems reduced uncertainty and fear. Knowing that reinforcements, artillery, or medical support could be summoned rapidly instilled courage. The moral effect extended beyond operators. Entire crews felt empowered, able to act decisively with a network supporting them. The synergy between technology and human psychology turned ordinary tank crews into highly effective teams, capable of sustaining prolonged operations with minimal hesitation. Strategic angle. Strategically, radios and Shermans amplified the overall operational capability of the Allied forces. Commanders could coordinate movements across entire divisions, synchronize attacks, and maintain pressure on retreating German units. Campaign planning became more fluid. Generals could issue directives with confidence, knowing that tanks in the field could adapt dynamically to unfolding situations. This flexibility was particularly evident during rapid advances through France and into Germany. Instead of pausing to consolidate positions, Sherman-equipped units could exploit breaches, envelop enemy formations, and maintain momentum. The ability to communicate instantly at every level of command transformed strategy from a static plan into a living process, responsive and adaptive. Victory was no longer solely dependent on firepower or numerical superiority. It required the orchestration of men, machines, and information. Operational innovation angle. The introduction of advanced radios also represented operational innovation. Logistics, movement, and engagement were interdependent. Radios allowed these components to function as a single system. Convoys could be coordinated with frontline movements. Artillery support adjusted instantly, and reconnaissance integrated seamlessly into real-time decision-making. Training procedures evolved to match the technology. Crews were drilled in radio etiquette, call signs, and rapid reporting protocols. Units practiced combined maneuvers with radio coordination, creating standardized responses that minimized errors and maximized efficiency. Repairs and maintenance were also integrated into operations. Signal officers could diagnose issues remotely or reroute communication paths, ensuring minimal disruption. The operational ecosystem of armored warfare became faster, more resilient, and adaptive, a true embodiment of modern combined arms principles. Cumulative impact. By combining these perspectives, German astonishment, moral and psychological advantages, strategic flexibility, and operational innovation, it becomes clear why the Sherman's radios were not just a technological add-on, but a decisive factor in Allied success. The interplay of technology, human skill, leadership, and enemy perception produced effects far greater than the sum of individual elements. Sherman tanks were no longer isolated combat units. They became nodes in a responsive, interconnected network. This network dictated the tempo of engagements, enhanced battlefield awareness, and allowed commanders to exploit fleeting opportunities. German troops, despite their experience and tactical knowledge, were constantly reacting to forces already in motion. The radios transformed simple armored divisions into high-speed, information-driven instruments of warfare. October 1944. The forests and villages of the Siegfried Line shimmered under a cold autumn sun. Mist curled from the damp ground, and the distant rumble of engines reverberated through valleys. American Sherman tanks, equipped with advanced radios, crept into position along forested ridges. Every crew member moved with precision, aware that seconds could determine the success of the operation. In contrast, German defenders relied on delayed communications, runners navigating treacherous terrain, and static field telephones. The imbalance of information was about to decide the outcome. Patton's advance through Germany had reached a critical juncture. The Allies needed to break through fortified lines, neutralize artillery positions, and prevent German forces from regrouping. Sherman tanks moved in coordinated columns, each unit relaying real-time observations back to division command and neighboring platoons. Machine gun nests, anti-tank positions, and concealed infantry were identified, bypassed, or neutralized with surgical efficiency. The radios allowed instantaneous adjustments. When one tank detected a hidden Panzerfaust team, artillery units were redirected, engineers prepared bridges for flanking maneuvers, and nearby armor adjusted course, all within minutes. German units scrambled to respond. Reports of tank movements, artillery strikes, and infantry positions arrived too late to coordinate a cohesive defense. Field commanders issued orders that were obsolete by the time they reached the front. Attempted counterattacks collided with Sherman columns already repositioned, and the rhythm of German resistance faltered. Confusion spread among soldiers accustomed to structured defenses. What had been an anticipated bottleneck turned into a rout, orchestrated not solely by firepower, but by the flow of information transmitted through radio networks. In the town of Aachen, the tactical advantage was starkly visible. Shermans entered the outskirts in tightly coordinated waves, infantry following behind, supported by artillery whose targets had been updated in real time. The Germans attempted to reinforce key intersections, but each detachment was outmaneuvered. Communications allowed American units to anticipate threats, redistribute forces, and maintain the initiative. Civilians peered from shattered windows as tanks rolled past, the synchronized hum of engines and radio chatter blending into a single, unstoppable current. Aachen fell faster than intelligence had predicted, a tangible demonstration of how radios had multiplied combat effectiveness. Elsewhere, near the Hürtgen forest, Sherman units faced dense woodland that had historically slowed armored advances. Thick trees and uneven terrain made coordination difficult, yet radio-equipped crews adapted instantly. Reconnaissance reports transmitted from lead tanks allowed trailing units to avoid ambushes, select optimal paths, and deliver supporting fire where needed. Even in low visibility, the networked communication maintained cohesion. German defenders, expecting to exploit terrain for defense, found themselves reacting to maneuvers they could neither predict nor counter. Radios had effectively reshaped the battlefield, turning natural obstacles into manageable terrain for the Allies. The psychological impact on both sides was profound. American crews, confident in their coordinated system, executed complex maneuvers with calm precision. Orders were trusted, and the flow of information reduced hesitation and fear. For German soldiers, confusion and disbelief replaced morale. Units that might have held positions were forced to retreat under pressure they could not understand. The collapse was not merely physical. It was a fracture of perception. Enemy commanders were watching an advancing force whose movements seemed prescient, responding faster than logic or strategy would allow. Even minor engagements reflected the decisive influence of radios. Patrols reporting minefields, ambushes, or artillery placements allowed Sherman columns to reroute or neutralize threats instantly. Combined arms operations, tank, infantry, artillery, and engineers functioned as a single organism, each element communicating and adapting in real time. In contrast, German coordination lagged hours behind, leaving defensive measures fragmented and ineffective. Every mile gained by the Allies highlighted the growing chasm between informed and uninformed forces. The cumulative effect of these engagements created a turning point. What might have been a slow, attritional advance became a rapid, unstoppable push. Sherman tanks, equipped with radios, transformed tactical challenges into opportunities. Entire German battalions surrendered or withdrew in confusion, unable to counteract forces moving in a synchronized, informed manner. Commanders recorded astonishment. They know where we are before we do. The battlefield itself became a testament to the power of integrated communication. By the end of this phase, the stage was set for the full operational impact of radios to be felt. The combination of technological superiority, human discipline, and tactical ingenuity had shifted the initiative decisively into Allied hands. Every breakthrough, every flanking maneuver, and every capture position was a direct consequence of instantaneous communication linking crews, units, and command. Mid-October 1944. The rolling hills of the Rhineland trembled under the thunder of engines and artillery fire. Sherman tanks, their radios crackling with coordination, advanced across shattered roads and forested ridges. Each unit acted in concert, responding instantly to threats, relaying intelligence, and executing flanking maneuvers with precision. Behind the front lines, supply trucks ensured fuel, ammunition, and rations kept pace, allowing armored columns to operate at maximum tempo. For the Germans, the situation was increasingly dire. The German defense, once confident in its ability to slow the Allied advance, now faced an unrelenting foe. Intelligence reports detailed American tanks bypassing prepared positions, infantry seizing villages ahead of artillery schedules, and engineers bridging destroyed roads before counterattacks could form. Commanders scrambled to issue orders, but communication delays and fragmented units rendered these efforts largely futile. The operational tempo of the Allies, amplified by radio communication, had created an invisible barrier the Germans could not penetrate. Near the town of Jülich, Sherman crews demonstrated the full advantage of advanced radios. Reconnaissance vehicles transmitting live updates allowed artillery units to adjust fire in real time, neutralizing hidden anti-tank emplacements. Infantry units followed closely, supported by rolling barges precisely timed to suppress resistance. German defenders attempting to regroup were caught in crossfires they could not anticipate. Within hours, positions that might have required days to capture fell, showcasing how information could dictate success as decisively as firepower. The cumulative impact of radio coordination extended beyond single battles. Operational planning for entire divisions was transformed. Commanders could visualize unit positions, redirect forces instantly, and synchronize attacks across multiple fronts. Sherman columns operated in a networked manner, adapting to enemy movements, terrain obstacles, and logistical changes without pause. German countermeasures, artillery strikes, ambushes, or reinforcements were consistently outpaced, leaving defenders perpetually reactive. What had traditionally been a contest of firepower had evolved into a contest of situational awareness and speed. Human endurance amplified technological advantages. Tank crews, aware of the capability to communicate instantaneously, executed complex maneuvers with confidence. Fatigue and stress were mitigated by clear instructions and immediate responses to threats. Supply convoys maintained continuous flow, ensuring fuel and ammunition never lagged behind. Mechanics repaired vehicles swiftly, often under enemy fire, reinforcing the system's reliability. Every element of the Sherman advance, crew skill, logistics, technology, interlocked seamlessly, producing an operational synergy the Germans could neither replicate nor disrupt. The German realization was stark and demoralizing. Units that might have mounted organized counterattacks withdrew under pressure, outmaneuvered and outpaced. Reports from front lines indicated that American tanks appeared where least expected, and coordinated artillery strikes rendered defensive strongpoints ineffective. German commanders acknowledged that their intelligence could not match the speed of Allied communications. The tactical advantage of radio-equipped Shermans had evolved into a strategic tool, reshaping the course of the campaign. In Aachen, the capture of key bridges and crossroads illustrated the decisive impact. Sherman units coordinated to encircle the city while cutting off potential German retreats. Radio communication allowed multiple battalions to converge simultaneously from different directions, leaving defenders trapped. Attempts to destroy bridges or mount counteroffensives failed, as engineers and armored units adapted in real time. By nightfall, Aachen was under Allied control, a symbol of how information, mobility, and coordination could achieve objectives previously thought impossible. Further north, in the Hürtgen Forest, similar outcomes unfolded. Dense terrain, previously a natural advantage for defenders, became a controlled environment for American forces. Radios enabled units to share positions, track enemy movements, and direct fire support precisely. German soldiers, accustomed to relying on observation and runners for coordination, were systematically outmaneuvered. Operations that once required weeks of attritional combat were executed in days, demonstrating the revolutionary effect of integrating communication technology into armored warfare. By late October, the consequences of radio coordination were unmistakable. Entire German divisions had been forced into retreat, defensive lines collapsed, and the tempo of the Allied advance accelerated beyond expectations. Patton's leadership, leveraging the technological edge of the Shermans, had converted battlefield mobility into strategic dominance. The front lines were no longer static. They were fluid, dictated by where tanks could move, communicate, and strike simultaneously. The climax of these operations underscored a crucial lesson. Modern warfare was no longer solely measured in tanks or artillery pieces. Success depended on the integration of information, mobility, and human endurance. The Sherman Tank's radios had transformed the battlefield into a networked environment, where speed of communication equaled speed of action. German forces, hampered by outdated coordination, faced the sobering reality that they were confronting not only firepower, but the unseen force of operational intelligence. By the end of this phase, the Allies had seized the initiative in the Rhineland, and the foundation for subsequent advances into Germany had been secured. The combination of tactical audacity, technological advantage, and relentless coordination had decisively broken the equilibrium, setting the stage for the eventual collapse of German resistance in Western Europe. November 1944. The map of Western Germany and the Rhineland bore the scars of relentless Allied advances. Cities were partially destroyed, roads cratered, and supply depots captured or abandoned. Patton's armored columns, fueled by uninterrupted logistics and guided by advanced radios and Sherman tanks, had shattered German expectations. The battlefield had shifted decisively, not solely through firepower, but through the integration of speed, communication, and operational coordination. The immediate tactical outcome was clear. German defensive lines had been fractured. Units intended to hold strategic positions found themselves outmaneuvered, outpaced, and often encircled. Aachen, the Hürtgen Forest, and surrounding areas had fallen under Allied control, providing gateways into the German heartland. Where German planners had expected slow, attritional campaigns, they faced rapid, coordinated assaults that left minimal time for regrouping. The psychological toll on German troops was profound. Morale, already weakened by sustained losses, declined further under the relentless pace of attacks that seemed omnipresent and impossible to counter. The American side, meanwhile, celebrated operational success, but faced the sobering reality of human cost. Sherman tank crews had pushed themselves to physical and mental limits, navigating mined roads, bombed bridges, and enemy fire. Drivers of the Red Ball Express endured exhaustion, heat, and long hours without rest, ensuring armored divisions remained fueled and supplied. Mechanics, engineers, and planners worked tirelessly behind the lines, often improvising repairs under threat. Casualties from accidents, ambushes, and environmental hazards were real, yet the determination to maintain momentum never faltered. This blend of endurance and coordination proved decisive, transforming logistics and human resilience into instruments of victory. Strategically, the Allies had demonstrated a new principle of modern warfare. Information and communication could dictate operational tempo as much as tanks or artillery. Radios in Sherman tanks allowed commanders to synchronize movements across multiple fronts, rapidly exploit breakthroughs, and neutralize enemy positions before reinforcements could arrive. The Germans, reliant on slower communication methods and fragmented intelligence, were consistently reactive rather than proactive. What had begun as a technological advantage evolved into a strategic one, fundamentally reshaping the operational landscape of Western Europe. Numbers underline the scale of achievement. Thousands of Sherman tanks advanced across hundreds of miles, each maintaining operational readiness thanks to radio coordination and continuous supply. Red Ball Express convoys transported over 12,000 tons of fuel, ammunition, and provisions daily, bridging hundreds of miles of contested territory. Hundreds of mechanics and engineers ensured vehicles remained operational, while radio operators facilitated instantaneous communication between advancing units and headquarters. This vast, interdependent system exemplified how modern warfare depended on more than weaponry. It required infrastructure, coordination, and human endurance operating in perfect harmony. The campaign also left a lasting imprint on German tactical thought. Commanders had assumed that Allied armored advances would be constrained by supply and communication limitations. These assumptions were shattered. Reports circulated noting that American tanks seemed omnipresent, supply lines unbroken, and artillery fire coordinated with unnerving precision. Even elite units were caught off guard by the speed and fluidity of operations. The Red Ball Express, coupled with advanced radios, had demonstrated that the ability to sustain mobility, communicate, and adapt dynamically could outweigh numerical or positional advantages. Beyond immediate operational consequences, there were broader strategic lessons. The Rhineland campaign underscored the centrality of logistics and communication in modern mechanized warfare. Tanks were effective only if fueled, armed, and coordinated. Infantry could advance only if resupplied. Artillery could only dominate if guided by real-time intelligence. Victory was no longer determined solely by mass or firepower, but by the ability to integrate human effort, technological innovation, and organizational excellence. The Allied advance illustrated this principle in stark terms, offering a blueprint for future operations in Europe and beyond. The human dimension remained at the heart of this achievement. Soldiers, tank crews, convoy drivers, and support personnel endured conditions that tested the limits of stamina and resolve. Their labor, often unseen and underappreciated, had directly enabled strategic success. Letters, diaries, and after-action reports highlight pride, exhaustion, and the awareness that logistical excellence had become as vital to victory as bravery on the battlefield. Late November 1944. The Western Front had been irrevocably altered. German troops were retreating toward the Rhine, their positions fragmented and morale shaken. The operational tempo maintained by Patton's Third Army, supported by continuous Red Ball Express convoys and the advanced radios and Sherman tanks, had made German resistance increasingly untenable. The battlefield had become a testament to the decisive role of logistics and communication in modern mechanized warfare. The strategic consequences were profound. By enabling near-constant mobility, the Allies had transformed their operational approach from static, attritional warfare into dynamic, maneuver-based campaigns. Rapid refueling and resupply ensured that armored divisions could exploit breakthroughs immediately, outflanking German positions before defensive preparations could solidify. German planners, accustomed to predicting Allied movements based on expected logistical constraints, found themselves repeatedly surprised. Their defensive doctrines, reliant on slowing enemy advances through attrition and terrain, were rendered obsolete by the synchronized integration of supply, communication, and firepower. The human element remained central. Convoy drivers, often operating in extreme heat or cold, navigated treacherous roads, bombed bridges, and enemy sabotage attempts. Sherman tank crews, coordinating via advanced radios, could communicate with artillery, infantry, and headquarters simultaneously, allowing rapid tactical adjustments and synchronized assaults. Mechanics and support personnel worked tirelessly to prevent delays, repairing vehicles under pressure, and improvising solutions when standard parts or routes failed. The relentless pace of operations tested endurance, but also demonstrated the extraordinary capacity of coordinated human effort when combined with technology and planning. The impact on German morale and command structure was stark. Reports indicated widespread confusion and frustration as Allied armored units advanced faster than expected, striking deep into territory the Germans had considered secure. Supply lines for German forces were increasingly overstretched, while the Allies' well-organized logistics kept their troops at full operational capacity. Defensive lines crumbled, counterattacks were thwarted, and retreat became a constant theme. Senior German officers acknowledged in their reports that logistical superiority and superior communication capabilities had become decisive factors on the battlefield, factors they could not easily counter. Technologically, the campaign highlighted a pivotal evolution in warfare. Radios in Sherman tanks allowed commanders to relay real-time intelligence, direct fire support, and coordinate movements across multiple units simultaneously. The ability to transmit orders and receive updates instantaneously meant that armored columns could maintain momentum, anticipate enemy reactions, and exploit weaknesses as they appeared. In contrast, German units relying on slower, fragmented communication methods were forced into reactive strategies. The combination of mobility and information flow had shifted the balance of operational power. The Red Ball Express itself became emblematic of Allied innovation. Tens of thousands of tons of fuel, ammunition, and provisions moved daily, uniting infrastructure, human effort, and military planning into a coherent system. Roads were continuously repaired, convoys rerouted as necessary, and maintenance teams ensured minimal disruption to the flow of supplies. This operation underscored a vital principle. Logistical networks were as decisive as the front lines they supported. Supply was no longer a background concern. It was a strategic weapon capable of dictating tempo, influencing engagements, and shaping campaign outcomes. The cumulative effect of these factors was clear by the end of November 1944. Patton's forces had penetrated deep into German territory, supported by an invisible chain of fuel and communication. Tactical and operational flexibility, once constrained by logistical limitations, had become virtually unlimited. German forces were left attempting to plug gaps in retreating lines, often abandoning key positions to maintain cohesion. Operational lessons were immediate and enduring. Superior logistics, human endurance, and integrated technology could decisively offset numerical or positional disadvantages. On a human level, the aftermath revealed the unsung heroism of support personnel. Drivers, mechanics, and radio operators, often far from the battlefield's direct dangers, had nonetheless determined the pace and effectiveness of combat operations. Their contribution highlighted a central truth. Modern warfare was no longer won solely by firepower, but by the integration of people, technology, and organization into an operationally cohesive system. The story of the Red Ball Express and the Sherman Tank's advanced radios offers more than a chronicle of wartime innovation. It reveals a profound truth about the nature of modern warfare. Victory was no longer determined solely by the number of guns or the size of armies. Instead, it hinged on the seamless integration of logistics, communication, and human endurance. The rapid advance of Patton's Third Army in 1944 demonstrated that an army's lifeblood, fuel, ammunition, and information could be wielded as decisively as any weapon. American convoys, traversing sun-scorched roads and fractured infrastructure, illustrated the endurance, ingenuity, and coordination required to sustain momentum across hundreds of miles. Sherman tank crews, communicating with unprecedented speed and precision, exemplified how technology amplified human decision-making on the battlefield. Together, these elements created a force capable of operating faster, more efficiently, and with greater tactical flexibility than their opponents anticipated. German generals, who once dismissed the logistical capabilities of the Allies, were confronted with the sobering reality that warfare had evolved. Speed and supply were now as lethal as steel and firepower. The human dimension is equally striking. Drivers, mechanics, radio operators, and planners, often overlooked in the historical narrative, became the invisible engines of victory. Their labor, risk, and ingenuity ensured that tanks moved without pause, infantry remained supplied, and artillery struck with timely precision. Their efforts underscored a timeless lesson. Wars are won not only by those on the front lines, but also by those who enable the front lines to function at peak efficiency. Strategically, the Red Ball Express reshaped military thinking for decades to come. It highlighted the decisive role of supply chains, operational planning, and technological integration in sustaining rapid advances. Communication, mobility, and endurance proved inextricably linked to success, influencing future doctrines in mechanized and combined arms warfare. Ultimately, the story is a testament to foresight, coordination, and the quiet heroism behind victory. Across the sun-baked roads of northern France, in the roar of engines and the hum of radios, the Allied forces demonstrated that logistical mastery could determine the course of battles, campaigns, and even the broader trajectory of history itself. In the convergence of supply, strategy, and human will, we see the enduring lesson of the Red Ball Express. That war is won not merely by firepower, but by the relentless orchestration of men, machines, and ideas. August 12, 1944. The morning fog clung to the bocage of Normandy, muted sunlight slicing through the hedgerows. A line of Sherman tanks rumbled forward, their engines low and steady, tires and treads crushing the wet earth. Dust mingled with the metallic scent of oil and gunpowder, rising in gentle clouds as the tanks advanced with mechanical precision. Inside, crews hunched over controls, hands tight on levers, eyes scanning for enemy positions. But their greatest advantage remained invisible. Radios crackling faintly, carrying commands, coordinates, and urgent updates across the battlefield. German soldiers, hidden in the maze of hedgerows and farmhouses, peered through scopes and binoculars, expecting the usual disorganized American push. They did not realize that every Sherman was linked in a silent web of communication, responding to orders almost before they were spoken, coordinating artillery, infantry, and armor in a harmony that made chaos seem impossible. This unseen technology would turn the tide in ways few could anticipate. On this fog-shrouded morning, the Americans moved not just with steel and firepower, but with the invisible force of coordination, a weapon the Germans had never fully understood. Summer 1944. Western Europe was a continent aflame with conflict. Following the D-Day landings on June 6th, Allied forces had secured beachheads along the Normandy coast, but the battle for France was far from over. German forces, seasoned and entrenched, had prepared defensive lines, utilizing the natural terrain of hedgerows, rivers, and forests to slow the Allied advance. The Bocage countryside became a maze of deadly ambushes and fortified farmhouses. Every mile forward demanded careful planning, relentless courage, and the ability to adapt to rapidly changing circumstances. The United States Army deployed its newest medium tank, the M4 Sherman. While often criticized for thinner armor compared to German panzer divisions, the Sherman possessed a technological advantage that was rarely visible on the battlefield: its radios. Unlike many German tanks, which relied on limited visual signals or short-range radio communication, American Shermans were equipped with radios in every vehicle. These instruments allowed real-time coordination, enabling tank crews to communicate not only with each other, but also with supporting infantry and artillery. What seemed like ordinary machinery became a system of synchronized units, moving with precision, reacting to threats almost instantaneously. The logistical challenge of maintaining armored forces in the field was enormous. Tanks consumed massive quantities of fuel, ammunition, and spare parts, while the crews required food, water, and medical support. The Allies' ability to sustain armored operations depended on meticulously planned supply chains, coordinated over vast distances. The Red Ball Express, the convoy system moving fuel and supplies from captured ports, was a critical component in this network, ensuring that Patton's Third Army could maintain its blitz across France. Without this infrastructure, even the most advanced tanks would have stalled, vulnerable to German counterattacks. German commanders, observing the Allied buildup, often underestimated the efficiency of American operations. They assumed that rapid advances would be constrained by supply lines, inexperienced crews, and mechanical breakdowns. While the panzer divisions had superior armor and firepower, their communications were inconsistent. Many German tank units lacked radios in every vehicle, relying on messengers or limited communication channels. Coordination across units was slower and often vulnerable to misinterpretation under the stress of battle. This disparity would prove critical as the Allies moved deeper into French territory. Sherman tanks, moving in combined arms formations with infantry and artillery, demonstrated the growing importance of integrated technology on the battlefield. Each crew understood its mission, but it was the radios that allowed the battlefield to function as a unified organism. Artillery could be called to precise coordinates, infantry could report obstacles ahead, and tank commanders could adjust movements instantly. This level of coordination allowed American forces to exploit gaps in German defenses, outmaneuver entrenched positions, and minimize unnecessary losses. While raw firepower remained important, the invisible network of communication became a decisive weapon in its own right. The Germans, meanwhile, faced a crisis of perception. Many commanders believed their superior tanks would dominate any engagement. They expected American units to advance slowly, hampered by terrain, mechanical failures, and lack of coordination. Yet, as the 1st Sherman battalions pushed forward in August 1944, reports began filtering back. These tanks moved with unprecedented cohesion, reacting to threats before they fully materialized. Ambushes that might have trapped isolated units were mitigated through rapid communication, allowing supporting forces to arrive just in time. German officers, accustomed to visual signals and rigid hierarchies, struggled to comprehend how these relatively lightly armored vehicles could achieve tactical superiority. The stage was set for a collision of expectations versus reality. American technology, logistics, and tactical doctrine combined to create an advantage invisible to the enemy, yet unmistakably effective. The Sherman's radios, paired with disciplined crews and efficient supply lines, turned what appeared to be an ordinary armored advance into a coordinated strike force capable of overwhelming German positions. The battlefield itself began to transform, dictated not solely by firepower, but by the speed and accuracy of information moving across it. This first section of context establishes the operational, technological, and logistical environment in which American Shermans operated. It demonstrates why radios, though invisible and often unremarked upon, were a decisive factor in the Allies' ability to execute rapid, coordinated maneuvers. The German underestimation of this factor would soon have tangible consequences on the front lines, as the Americans leveraged technology, planning, and human skill to maintain momentum. By late August 1944, the Allied advance through northern France was transforming from cautious slog to rapid maneuver warfare. Patton's Third Army, fueled by the Red Ball Express, surged forward, tanks thundering across open fields and villages in a continuous push toward the German rear. The M4 Sherman, often underestimated for its armor and armament, revealed strengths that went beyond gunnery and protection. Every tank carried a radio, a technological advantage that gave American units a cohesion German forces could not match. Communication reshaped tactics. Crew members could relay positions of enemy forces, request artillery strikes, or coordinate flanking maneuvers while on the move. Infantry accompanying the tanks received immediate updates on threats and obstacles, while engineers could report on destroyed bridges and route conditions in real time. German forces, relying on slower and more fragmented communication methods, often found themselves reacting too late or in disorganized fashion. A single Sherman platoon could call in reinforcements or artillery within minutes, turning potential ambushes into decisive victories. The human element amplified the advantage. Crews trained extensively in combined arms doctrine, learning to integrate the tank's capabilities with infantry and artillery. Radio operators became pivotal figures, responsible for maintaining communication under fire. Every mission depended on precise timing and coordination. A breakdown in communication could jeopardize an entire advance. Yet, the disciplined execution of orders allowed units to maintain momentum even under chaotic conditions. Soldiers witnessed firsthand how technology and training could transform the pace and effectiveness of armored warfare. Logistics remained the linchpin of this advance. Tanks consumed enormous amounts of fuel, and each mile of rapid maneuver strained the supply system. The Red Ball Express worked around the clock, delivering thousands of gallons of fuel daily to keep the armored columns moving. Trucks, loaded with fuel and ammunition, traveled across damaged roads, bombed bridges, and contested territory. Drivers, mechanics, and supply officers worked tirelessly, ensuring that Patton's forces never paused for want of resources. The combination of reliable supply and advanced communication systems created a synergy that German commanders had not anticipated. German units, meanwhile, struggled to adapt. Field reports often highlighted the Americans' ability to exploit weak points in defensive lines, bypassing strongholds and reaching positions the Germans considered secure. A fortified village or an entrenched position, thought to be safe from immediate attack, could suddenly be threatened by a rapid Sherman advance coordinated via radio. Even when German units attempted counterattacks, they were frequently too slow or misaligned, hampered by delays in communication and lack of situational awareness. The Allies' operational tempo, sustained by logistics and reinforced by radios, became a strategic weapon. The Shermans themselves were not invulnerable. Crews had to contend with anti-tank weapons, artillery, and mines, as well as the inherent mechanical limitations of their vehicles. Yet their ability to communicate allowed for swift responses. Damaged tanks could call for repair or evacuation. Units could shift positions to cover gaps, and support fire could be coordinated instantly.